Stella handed the steaming cup to the veteran, gripping his dog's leash in front of the inspector. The supervisor's tone never wavered. The chill in his words was enough. "You're done, Stella." 6 years of work wiped away by one curt sentence. Without a word of protest, she untied her apron, hands shaking, and stepped away from the counter. She wasn't punished for selling coffee after hours, but for standing up for someone who'd once stood up for the country. What she didn't know was that a customer had filmed everything. Half the shift was still ahead when the parking lot rumbled. 4 green Humvees rolled into the spaces. A Marine Corps colonel in dress blues jumped out, a man who owed his life to buddies like Stella's veteran. The air changed the moment he arrived. Stella Evans had never been the kind who stands out at first glance. At 35, she ran the Mason Mug Café 15 minutes from Fort Granger as if it were a communal living room. The old sign outside promised coffee, but inside you found laughter, advice, and birthday cards. Mason, Georgia could be on a postcard. Brick streets, oaks in neat rows, flags on every third porch. Even so, the town's warmth started inside the Mason Mug. Stella knew every customer's name, pinned graduation photos to the corkboard, and slid over an extra stool for anyone who came in with a service dog. When the colonel marched up to the empty counter, everyone sensed something bigger than a simple cup of coffee was coming. Anyone who walked through the Mason Mug after a dragged-out shift or an endless patrol remembered how good it felt just to breathe. The menu had no frills, bold roast, bottomless refills, and hand-scrawled notes on the chalkboard. Stella was the heart of the place. She stored names, birthdays, homecoming dates. She knew who wanted sunny-side-up eggs and who'd skipped caffeine since coming back from Iraq. Most of all, she offered silence for wounds only the owner could see. Every Wednesday at 9 sharp, she hosted Heroes Hour. It started with 3 chairs: her father-in-law, Nolan Evans, a former Marine drill instructor, Ralph, a Vietnam vet who hardly spoke, and Louisa, an Army nurse whose laugh tinkled like a wind chime. The circle grew. Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Voices from different wars drawn less by the coffee and more by the host. Before each talk, Stella always reminded them, this is a place to be seen, not fixed, to sit, not to perform. When the circle settled in, shoulders dropped, mugs passed hand to hand, memories wove together, some light, some heavy, some pain still without words. Stella hardly talked about herself, but the town knew the outline. Her husband, Sergeant Jackson Evans, was killed in Helmand 6 years ago. His photo watched over the register, jeans, flannel, a mug raised to the camera, snapped 2 weeks before his final mission. He never made it home. Stella never thought about marrying again. She chose to turn grief into something she could touch, a cafe that sheltered anyone who needed refuge. The community felt it as an extension of their own homes. Veterans greeted her with a grateful "ma'am." Hurried teenagers held the door. The mayor dropped by every month just to say few projects united the town like hers. Stella, though, didn't count trophies. She counted purpose. Every cup slid quietly in front of a jittery soldier. Every pause to round the counter and ask the person staring out the window if they wanted company. Every dog allowed to sprawl under a table. No leash, no questions. Flowed from instinct, not a handbook. It was her way of saying, you belong. That Wednesday, the ritual started like always. The bell over the door rang, mixing with muffled laughs, shared whispers, and the warm hum of people who know they're seen. Stella, sleeves rolled, hair in a practical knot, had already filled the pot of dark roast for Heroes Hour and lined up the ceramic mugs reserved for vets. Then the door opened again. Cold air came in with a man, a dog, and a hush so sharp it made the coffee steam look thicker. They'd bring a storm that would echo all the way to Washington, and Stella's little refuge would accidentally become the battleground for something bigger than any city ordinance. James Butler eased the door shut with the calm of a man who's counted plenty of steps in hostile ground. He was past 50, shoulders straight, eyes sweeping the room before he sat down. Shadow, a lab German Shepherd mix, stuck to his heel. The red vest read, "Service dog, do not pet." Stella raised a hand in greeting and pointed to the table by the window. James whispered thanks and took the corner seat. Peace didn't last. The door slammed again, louder this time. In stepped a tall man in a navy blazer, creases knife-sharp, face set like the world was at fault for existing. The badge read, Dylan Miller, State Health Inspector. Without a word, he started scanning the cafe. "Can I help you?" Stella asked, voice steady. "Inspection," he said, tapping counters, checking labels, opening coolers. Spotting Shadow, he froze as if he'd hit an invisible wall. "That animal breaks the code," he declared, loud enough to hush the room. "No animals where food is served." Stella stepped around the counter in a single stride, tone firm but controlled. "He's a registered service dog, protected by law." Miller's brow clenched as he raised his clipboard like a gavel. "Laws don't wipe away fur or drool. If the dog stays, this cafe closes." Their eyes met and the silence grew thick, ready to crack. James steadied himself in his chair and gripped his mug, afraid it might slip. Shadow stayed motionless at his feet. Only his eyes tracked every move in the room, now drowned in silence. Stella broke the tension with a long breath and a line she couldn't take back. "I'm not kicking out a veteran, or the dog that's with him. Write your report, Miller, but make sure it says you tried to humiliate a man who served this country in front of the very people he swore to protect." The inspector's jaw quivered. A customer muttered, "That's right." Just then, another presence filled the doorway. Claire Price, regional manager for Mason Muggs, early for a routine visit. She took in the scene and spoke in a razor-sharp voice. "Stella Evans, you violated the health code in front of a state inspector. Gather your things. You're fired." Sighs followed. A spoon clinked on the floor. James stood, stunned. Stella took in the room. The steaming coffee, the veteran, the German Shepherd, the chalkboard that read, "Hero's Hour, free coffee for veterans." A barely there smile curved her lips. With trembling fingers, she untied her apron, folded it, and set it on the counter. She leaned toward the young barista, Lena, and whispered, "Make sure James gets his refill." She walked out the side door into the morning light. No one followed, but a phone lit up and someone hit the record button. In the swirl of notifications, a new story found its spotlight. An employee dismissed not for breaking rules, but for refusing to betray her own corps. Thousands of miles away beneath mission photos, Colonel Oliver Hughes picked up the call that would change his morning. 35 minutes later, the Mason mug was still wrapped in heavy silence. Some customers murmured, others let their lattes cool. A few stared out at the fog-soaked street searching for meaning. Lena stayed behind the counter. Her hands shook as she poured James's second cup. Later she'd say that if she'd walked away, she would have felt she was betraying the woman who'd been forced out. James, however, had set his mug down and hadn't touched it since Stella left. At his feet, Shadow stayed frozen, ears up, waiting for a cue that never came. Then a deep rumble rolled into the cafe, first a whisper, then thunder. Chairs rattled, coffee spilled, windows groaned. From the east end of Main Street, 4 Humvees emerged, tires slicing the morning fog. Headlights cut the mist in military rhythm. The vehicles parked side by side, sealing off the front. All the doors opened at once. Colonel Hughes stepped out, flawless in marine dress blues, gleaming buttons, white gloves, medals that told whole campaigns. Behind him, 24 soldiers formed a rigid line on the sidewalk, as if the cold air itself were at attention. Inside, the air seemed to harden. Inspector Miller froze, clipboard dangling from his fingers. Claire Price paled and backed away from the counter as though it were hot coals. The bell jingled and the colonel walked in alone. His boots beat the floor like marching drums. He stopped in the center, looked at Lena, who swallowed hard, then at James, who rose slowly. They exchanged a brief nod, answered by a salute that filled the room. The silence split when Miller stammered, I didn't know who he was." Without raising his voice, the colonel replied, "No one needs titles to deserve dignity." He turned to Lena. "Is Stella Evans here?" "She was fired for standing up for Mr. Butler and Shadow," she whispered. The officer's jaw clenched. "That woman gave the families on this base shelter when even the agencies were lost. She gave my men room to breathe when they came home, offered silence when words failed, and treated a decorated Marine with the respect this country promised and forgot." James cleared his throat, his first words. "Stella questioned no one," he murmured. "She didn't flinch when I walked in with the dog. She filled my mug and offered me a roof for the night." For years he hadn't felt the exact weight of his own skin. A tear slipped from the customer at the register, shattering the hush and sparking something in me. Outside, Colonel Hughes gave a small signal, and the Marines lined up like clockwork. When they crossed the doorway, there was no noise, only the rhythm of duty. Two of them reached the counter, took the logo off the wall, and folded the vinyl with the reverence reserved for flags. A third lifted the freshly painted chalkboard that had ridden in on the Jeep. Claire Price tried to speak. The colonel stopped her with a look that ended any reply. "You made your choice. Now it's our turn," he muttered before disappearing, phone pressed to his ear. Not 5 steps later, Lena's phone buzzed by the espresso machine. The order came from Fort Granger. Stella was to report to headquarters today. James held his breath. Shadow rose slowly, and the scent of roasted beans became something else, something ready to boil over. Miles away, Stella still sat in the pickup parked in front of the house. Key in hand, engine off, she rewound the morning scene by scene. Her coffee-stained jeans, the plaid shirt that had seen so many dawns, and the espresso-blotched shoes whispered in a low voice that the next step wouldn't fit in that parking lot anymore. A public firing, right in front of people who only wanted coffee. Stella barely had time to complain before a phone call flipped her day. Colonel Oliver Hughes wanted her at Fort Granger, immediately. She didn't know if it was punishment or a reward, but she recognized the tone of someone offering a new mission. Leaving the Mason mug, she traded the muffin tray for her car keys and took the same road as always, this time with her stomach tight and her head buzzing with questions. The base gate stood like a landmark between what she'd lost and what she could still win. Inside, straight streets were dotted with flags, and the distant cadence of a platoon reminded her that time marched differently here. Hughes waited at the admin entrance, khaki uniform spotless, posture relaxed like someone who controls every inch around him. "Stella, thanks for coming." The handshake was firm but quick. No small talk. He led her down a hallway lined with commanders' portraits and operation maps, to a plain room with folding chairs, whiteboards, and stacked boxes. "This veterans transition program has been stalled for 2 years," he said. "It needs someone who speaks their language." Stella watched young people laying out PT mats and boxing up donated gear. She felt the same tingle that comes before a big change. Maybe this was the next chapter she hadn't dared to imagine. The colonel adjusted his beret and, in a "let me tell you a secret" tone, locked eyes with her. "You never had a therapist's badge or a social work degree, but you built a refuge where invisible wounds started to heal. You did it with coffee and a listening ear while million-dollar budgets got lost in paperwork." A murmur cut across the room. "Is that her?" From the shadows stepped a young woman barely in her 20s. Long sleeves covered the burn scars on her arms and face. Her badge read Maya Scott. Beside her, a golden retriever pup wagged its tail, the red vest showing it was still in training. "Hi," Maya said, her voice shaking more than the dog. "I saw the video of you, that older guy, and the dog. I haven't set foot in a cafe since I came home, but I think I could try if the place was yours." The knot in Stella's chest loosened. The colonel smiled. "We don't want you as a symbol. We want you as director of this center." The air rushed from her lungs. "Are you serious?" "Completely. You'll pick the activities, design the spaces, set the tone. You know what works. Community, routine, respect." Stella turned to Maya, thought of James, of Shadow, of all those who came to the Mason mug not for the latte, but for the peace. She realized the weight of the offer. "I'm in," she whispered. The colonel nodded, rolled up his sleeves, and said, "Then let's get started." Stella walked late into the empty room that would become Fort Granger's nerve center. Bare walls, scuffed floor, and the feeling that something essential was about to be born. From her pocket she pulled a photo. Jackson, her husband, feet on the old cafe table, laughing like someone who trusts the world. She stuck the memory on the wall. No frame, just purpose. News spread like wildfire. By the next Friday, the brand new Transition and Wellness Center was humming. Veterans who'd avoided the base for years showed up on cautious feet. Young recruits arrived hand in hand with hesitant spouses. The Mason Herald devoted a full page, announcing that Fort Granger had found a second wind. Nothing there came from grand gestures. Stella didn't call celebrities or hire consultants. She repeated what she'd always done. She listened. She asked names, learned accents, read silences. Next to the coffee maker, she hung a whiteboard with 2 questions. Who needs a ride? And who needs someone to listen? Every scribble became a conversation. Every conversation a bond. She kept dogs in the therapy rooms, curled at soldiers' feet, and kept jotting everything in her old espresso-stained notebook. With the smell of fresh ground beans in the air, jokes resurfaced. Laughter echoed down the halls, and the silence weighing on many uniforms began to crack. At Fort Granger, trust was being poured into hot cups again, one serving at a time. Grace slid the thick notebook across the table and quietly added new pages, one for each veteran who walked in. Days shifted. Calm mornings, hard afternoons, shifts filled with silence and the hiss of the espresso machine. Still, a shelter was taking shape where pain didn't hide and healing didn't shout. Each story made the air a little lighter, as if the room learned to breathe with them. James started showing up almost every day. Shadow, the lab, sprawled in his favorite corner like he owned the place. On Tuesdays, Maya Rio was back to sketching. Dogs, hands, reunions, though she still hadn't joined the circle of voices. Fridays belonged to Lena, barista from the Mason Mug. She arrived with hot coffee and ready jokes. When Grace hesitated between two wallpapers or needed to polish the website copy, Lena gave her opinion before anyone could raise a hand. Not everyone was celebrating. Civil servants found it odd to see a federal pilot program run by someone without a formal degree. Auditors showed up silently, clipboards raised, suits starched with skepticism. They combed through records, fired off questions, even tested the water filter. In the end, the lead auditor looked up. "What certifications qualify you to counsel veterans?" Graca stayed calm. "None," she said, steady. "Just persistence and care." The auditor didn't argue. He jotted it down and turned the page. 7 days after the inspector's visit, Stella opened the official email. The Wellness Center had made the list of projects that might become a national model. For Colonel Hughes, it was an operational win. For her, a gift that arrived right on time. Even excited about the new phase, something kept pulling her thoughts back to the old Mason Mug. On her first free afternoon, she walked there without drawing attention. Lena was lining up the cups when she saw her. "Word is you've gotten famous," she teased, sliding over a steaming mug. "I just needed coffee," Stella answered, letting a smile slip. The place had changed. Portraits of veterans covered the walls, James, Maya, and many faces telling silent stories. Near the register, a new sign declared, "Stella's Corner. Nobody sits alone here." The message was simple, but it caught the eye like an invitation. Late in the afternoon, she crossed town to speak at a bazaar supporting military families. No fancy stages. Wooden tables, crayon-colored posters, the smell of fresh-baked cake. Stella ditched her notes. "I never planned to start a program," she said, raising her voice just enough. "I just refused to send away a man and his dog." For a second, the hall went quiet. Then applause filled the space, long and genuine. In the back, James stood, the metal shining on his shirt, and saluted her with 2 fingers on the brim of his cap. Hours later, back at the now empty center, Stella sat in front of the mural. She pulled out the photo of the Mason Mug taken the day after the Humvees arrived. People shoulder to shoulder, dogs under the tables, mugs steaming, and pinned it in the empty corner. There, among so many snapshots, the image reminded her the goal wasn't greatness but connection. No fear, no shame, just belonging. Above the photo, someone had pinned a note. "Legacy isn't what we leave for ourselves, but what we protect in others." In the quiet, Stella realized the old café hadn't vanished. It had just moved. 3 weeks after the bazaar, a cream envelope sealed with the Department of Defense crest landed on her desk. Colonel Hughes walked in, escorted by the buzz of the lights, and handed it over. "Better sit down." The official lines wavered before her eyes. Nomination for the National Distinguished Service to Veterans Commendation. Stella reread it, stunned. "I didn't do anything special," she murmured. "Exactly," Hughes laughed. Besides the ceremony in Washington, the invite booked her for a talk at the National Veterans Defense Conference. The weight of it made her legs wobble. "I've never spoken in public." "You're about to start," he said, already walking away. On travel day, the suitcase held only a blazer, Jackson's worn-out watch, and the notebook from the counter, names, birthdays, notes like "Maya prefers tea," and "Avoid May 15th with James." In the lobby, a voice called, "Need a ride, Miss Evans?" James appeared, spotless in his navy blue uniform. Shadow wagged his tail, calm. "I've been assigned as your escort," he announced. Stella laughed, half tense, half charmed. "You look sharp." "You're the one talking at the Pentagon," he shot back, opening a path like the mission started right then. The auditorium was almost humming. White tablecloths pulled tight, a brass podium gleaming, curious lenses spinning on tripods. When my name lit up the big screen, silence took over the room. I gripped the mic and admitted right off that I'm no general and no doctor. I just ran a small café a few steps from a barracks. There I served coffee and an ear. I explained, pausing between sentences, that veterans didn't walk through the door looking for answers. They were after presence, a place where they could exist without having to prove anything. Every mug was a reminder that someone saw them whole. Then I told the story of the day I got fired for letting a soldier and his service dog take the last available table. It seemed a small reason to lose a job, but it revealed the heart of everything. It was never about coffee, it was about dignity. The crowd answered with a wave of applause that filled the high ceiling, but at the back, one man stayed still. James, veteran of long silences, just nodded, like someone finally understanding his new post. When the sun slipped behind the Potomac, I left the hotel alone, looking for some air. By the riverbank, an older man with a white beard and a gray suit appeared. He smiled gently and, before I could say anything, held up an old photo. Me, Jackson, and him, back then in uniform, in front of the cafe, long before my husband's last mission. In that worn picture, everything I'd told gained another layer, as if the past had decided to sit in on the conference too. He raised his cup and spoke almost in a whisper. "The day I got my discharge, you brought me coffee and a smile. That's when I started to recognize the man in the mirror again." In his other hand, he held a photograph. "Now it's yours." Stella's fingers trembled as she accepted the gift. The parade in Mason would go on without her. She chose to drive straight to the wellness center where the fire pit still warmed the quiet of a few veterans. Along the stone path, she crossed the courtyard and stopped in front of the memory wall. From her purse, she took out a snapshot from the conference. The audience on its feet, applause hanging in the air. She pinned up the picture and, right beside it, fixed the old cafe photo. Jackson in uniform, eyes tired but alive. Beneath both, she stuck a note. "Honor grows where kindness endures." As she turned, the door creaked. A young man with an uneasy expression walked in, his cap twisted between his fingers. "Is this the place for folks like us?" he asked, without quite looking up. Stella answered calmly, "This is the place for all of us." He took a deep breath and stepped inside. Outside, the world was rushing by. In here, every slow gesture mattered. It's easy to overlook the soft-spoken waitress, the tremor in a soldier's hand, the discreet wag of a service dog's tail. Yet these silent, almost invisible snapshots quietly shape who we become. Stella Evans wore no uniform and showed no insignia. Even so, she carried something impossible to ignore: dignity. When a veteran walked into the little cafe in Mason, Georgia, she noticed his discomfort in the crowded room. With a simple gesture, she stood, offered her seat, and quietly paid his bill. The room fell silent, not because of the price of the meal, but because of the quiet courage that act held. Honor isn't born from grand speeches, but from everyday choices. How many Stellas have crossed our paths without our noticing? How many times have we thanked a veteran only with words, without an action that shows respect? In an age of heated opinions, her example invites a pause. Would I stand up for someone I barely know or stay seated in the comfort of indifference? Maybe you've witnessed an act of quiet bravery, or been the beneficiary of one. Share it in the comments. Your story could be the spark that moves someone else to act when resolve is needed. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and send the video to that friend who believes in the power of silent gestures. Here we tell stories that go beyond the uniform. They celebrate the humanity behind it. After all, the firmest stance rarely comes with a salute. Sometimes it starts with a cup of coffee and the calm decision to say, "I won't stand by." Thank you for watching and for valuing stories that shine a light on everyday quiet courage. If this message resonated with you, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next stories. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that small acts can change entire paths. Until the next chapter, And may you, in the meantime, find ways to make a difference in someone's everyday life.